Hey everyone. Today's story starts with divorce papers slammed on a front porch and ends with a truth nobody saw coming. Stay with me till the end. You're going to want to hear how this really plays out. Hope you enjoy. 5 days after I got cut loose from my job in compliance operations at a big hospital network in Philadelphia, my wife came home early and acted like she was walking into a board meeting, not our townhouse. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 58 years old. I lived in a narrow brick townhouse in Queen Village with my wife, Colby, who was in her early 50s and liked control more than she liked people. She didn't slam the door. She didn't sigh. She walked straight to the dining table, set a thin gray folder down in front of me, and took the seat across like we were about to review quarterly numbers. "We need structure," she said, calm as anything. "Uncertainty requires controls." I had been laid off less than a week. Restructure, they called it. That word again. It followed me home. Quick note, before we go further, share in the comments which country you're watching from. And let's continue. The folder had my name printed on a clean white label. Inside was a document titled Domestic Operations Agreement. It read like something I used to send to vendors. Tight language, bullet points, defined terms, 50-50 split on all expenses, immediate separation of personal accounts, individual responsibility for groceries, utilities, streaming services, reimbursement timelines spelled out in hours. Then I hit the section that made my jaw tighten. Shared space usage fee. Kitchen, living room, laundry area. Billed by estimated hours and impact on wear. There was even a chart. I stared at it thinking I must have missed a joke somewhere, but Colby's face stayed flat. "This protects both of us," she said. "It keeps things fair." Fair. I'd spent years smoothing her edges at partner dinners, laughing off her sharp comments, taking the hit so she didn't have to. Now I was a line item. There was a clause labeled Mandatory Therapeutic Support. I would pay for weekly sessions with a provider mutually agreed upon. The language framed it as care, but it read like documentation, like something you attach later. "You're going to need guidance during this transition," she added. She slid a pen across the table toward me, no raised voice, no insults, just that steady look, like she was assessing risk. For a second, I felt heat climb up my neck. Not shame, not fear, just clarity. This wasn't a fight. This was positioning. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I signed it the way I signed chain of custody forms at work. Steady hand, clean signature, no drama. Colby watched the ink dry like she was closing a deal. While she gathered the pages, I pulled out my phone and said I needed a copy for my records. I photographed every page, every initial line, every ridiculous fee schedule. She didn't stop me. "Good," she said. "Transparency matters." I nodded, like I agreed. Then I went upstairs, sat on the edge of our bed, and texted my brother. "Klaus, you were right." I put the phone down, stood back up, and walked to my desk to start a new folder on my laptop. The next morning, I opened my laptop and named the folder Household Controls, because if Colby wanted a system, she was going to get one. I went downstairs to make coffee, and when I opened the cabinet for a mug, a printed checklist stared back at me from the inside of the door. It was taped up straight, like she'd used a level. It listed who bought what, which shelf belonged to who, and a note that consumables had to be reimbursed within 48 hours, like we were sharing office supplies instead of a life. Colby walked in while I was reading it, already dressed for the day like she had somewhere important to be. "It's simpler this way," she said, and her voice stayed calm like she was explaining a policy update. "It's simple if you like turning everything into a bill," I said, and I kept my hand steady on the cabinet door. She didn't react, just poured herself water and watched me like my tone was the problem. By late morning, she had the concierge office issue separate key cards for the storage rooms in the basement. The email confirmation hit my inbox because the building kept both our names on file, and the wording made me laugh without humor. When we went down there, Colby walked to the cages like she was choosing a seat at a restaurant. She took the bigger one without pausing, then looked at me like I should be grateful I got any space at all. "You can use that side," she said, pointing to the smaller cage. "It should be enough if you're not accumulating unnecessary things." I nodded once, because arguing in a concrete basement wasn't going to change anything. I swiped my new card, heard the lock click, and memorized the sound. Back upstairs, I started tracking my expenses like I was billing a client. I made a spreadsheet with categories, dates written out, and notes on why each purchase happened, because if Colby wanted a paper trail, I could build a highway. That afternoon, I called Rochelle Haldane at the hospital network, and I kept my voice professional. "I need the written reason for my separation," I said, "and I need it clean, not vague." Rochelle didn't argue, but her voice got thin in that scared way people sound when someone else is standing near them. Daniel, it was a restructure, she said, then added too fast. That's all I'm allowed to say right now. Allowed by who? I asked, and I heard a quiet inhale on her end like she'd almost answered by accident. I can't get into that, she said, and the line went cold in a way that wasn't about signal. 2 days later, Graham Sutter started dropping by. He showed up with that polite smile people use when they're checking if you're about to do something messy, and he stood just inside the doorway like he was measuring the room. Colby wanted me to see how you were holding up, he said, and his eyes flicked to my desk where the folders were starting to stack. These situations go smoother when everyone stays reasonable. I'm being very reasonable, I said, and I didn't offer him a seat. He gave a small nod like he'd logged my attitude, then left the same way he came in. That night, Colby announced, "We're hosting less until you're productive again," and she said it like she was changing our cable plan. The words hit harder than the money rules, because I'd spent years smoothing her edges at partner dinners, taking her mother's cold comments to the chest, and making Colby look warm when she wasn't. I didn't ask her to take it back because she meant it. I went to the bedroom closet, pulled out my passport, old tax returns, performance reviews, and anything tied to shared accounts, then locked it all into a file box I could move fast. On Sunday, I watched a game in the living room, and Colby sent me an itemized shared living room time charge before halftime was over. I paid it without a word, printed the confirmation, and slid it into a folder I labeled Exhibits, then shut the tab with a hard click. Later that week, Klaus called, and his voice came through sharp and steady. "I'm going to pull what I can on her side," he said. "Public filings, LLC records, anything that smells off." "Do it," I told him, and I opened a new tab in my ledger with his name at the top. I kept the phone to my ear for another second after Klaus finished talking, then set it down and stared at the new tab I'd made. Colby thought that contract was going to shrink me into the corners of my own house, but all it really did was hand me a ruler. If she wanted life measured, then I was done giving away anything for free. I opened a fresh document and titled it Labor Log, plain and boring on purpose, the way I used to label compliance binders so nobody could claim it was emotional. I started small and ugly. Every errand run, every vendor call, every time I handled Townhouse issues so Colby could float through her day like she had no distractions. I logged the plumber calls, the appliance troubleshooting, the times I dealt with the HOA emails, and even the stupid stuff like chasing down a missing package in the lobby. Then I priced it out using normal market rates, nothing dramatic, just what it cost to pay someone else to do it. Handyman time at a basic rate, personal assistant tasks at a basic rate, event planning at a basic rate, and the kind of admin work Colby acted like didn't count because it happened quietly. The numbers weren't there to punish her. They were there to prove a point she'd spent years ignoring. It hit me fast that it wasn't just chores. It was the dinners we hosted for her private equity circle, the donor lunches tied to Dahlia's charity boards, and the travel planning that always landed on my plate because Colby hated details unless she could weaponize them. It was calling restaurants, smoothing over seating drama, making sure her favorite people got treated like royalty, and then cleaning up afterward while she disappeared upstairs to answer emails. It was also the quiet cover when Colby forgot birthdays and anniversaries, and I handled the gifts and the calls so nobody blamed her for being cold. A couple days into it, my desk started filling up with binders, labeled with clean tabs like I was back in the hospital network. Colby walked past and slowed down, her eyes snagging on the neat stacks like they offended her sense of ownership. "What are you doing?" she asked, and she didn't say it like curiosity. She said it like I'd installed a lock she didn't approve. I didn't look up from the page I was numbering. "Following your system and keeping it fair," I said, and my voice stayed even because I wasn't giving her a reaction to use. She let out a short laugh, sharp and fake. "That is you coping through busy work, Daniel, and it's kind of sad to watch." "It's not busy work if it holds up," I said, and I capped my pen with a click that felt louder than it should have. She stared at me for half a beat, then walked away like she'd won something. She didn't understand the difference between noise and evidence, and I didn't correct her. I just kept building. While I logged labor, I also started tracking the way money moved through our house. Not in a dramatic way, not with wild accusations, just patterns and timing. Which bills landed in the shared mailbox, which ones suddenly got rerouted, which accounts showed access issues, and which payments started showing up earlier than usual, like someone was trying to get ahead of a future argument. Colby claimed she wanted fairness, but the flow of cash told a different story, and I wrote it down without commentary. Midweek, A bank notice came in the mail and landed on the hall console before Colby could intercept it. The envelope was thin and bland, the kind that looks harmless until it isn't. I opened it because my name was on it too, and the letter talked about a beneficiary update on an insurance policy. My name wasn't removed, but it had been reviewed, and that one word made my stomach go tight. People don't review that kind of thing when they feel safe. They review it when they're preparing exits. I slid the notice into my exhibits folder, then took a photo for backup because paper had a habit of disappearing in my house lately. My phone buzzed a little later with a message from Klaus, and I opened it while standing at the kitchen counter. He wrote, "Reporter friend says your hospital network has been circling an acquisition tied to a fund Colby invested in." I read it twice, then once more, slow, and felt the layoff settle into a new shape. Restructure wasn't just a business word anymore. It was a lever. I didn't call Colby out, and I didn't pace the room like a scared man. I walked back to my desk, added a new line to my timeline, and started a fresh binder labeled Acquisition Thread, then clipped Klaus's message into the front pocket. I slid the new binder into the stack, then stood up and walked out to the hall like I had somewhere to be. On the console table by the front door, an envelope sat half under a stack of glossy flyers, the kind of plain white thing people ignore until it bites them. Colby had been routing more mail to herself lately, but she didn't catch everything, and this one looked like it had slipped through. I opened it at the console because I wasn't carrying it upstairs like a guilty teenager. Inside were account summaries, crisp pages with transaction lines and those sterile headings banks use to make everything feel normal. I scanned like I was back at work, eyes moving fast, looking for patterns and repeats. That's when I saw it. A recurring payment labeled Klein Strategy Consulting, just under $4,000 a month, running back most of a year. I stared at the name until it stopped feeling like letters and started feeling like a person. Maren Klein, Colby's outside consultant, the one who always seemed a little too embedded in Colby's logistics, like she'd been invited into decisions she didn't belong in. I'd heard Colby say Maren will handle it 100 times, and I'd seen Maren smile at dinners, bright and polite and too practiced. I didn't jump straight to a personal explanation because that was the lazy story people tell when they want drama. I jumped to purpose. If those payments were real, there would be deliverables, invoices, some kind of work product that could stand in daylight. If they weren't real, then the only thing left was lies, and lies always leave tracks. I carried the pages to my desk and laid them flat, smoothing the paper like it mattered. Then I opened my laptop and searched for Klein Strategy Consulting the way I'd search a vendor, not the way a jealous husband searches a name. I kept it clean, public sources only, nothing illegal, nothing sloppy. Sloppy people lose cases, and I wasn't interested in losing anything else. The registration I found was thin, like someone had built the company on a napkin. An LLC with a mailing address that matched a luxury building across town, the kind with a doorman and polished lobby floors. No website worth mentioning, no listed clients, no proof of real work. Just a shell with a nice address. I called Klaus and kept my voice low. "I found recurring consulting payments tied to Maren's name," I said. "I want you to pull anything you can on the LLC, clean in public." Klaus didn't act surprised, which told me he'd been expecting something. "Send me the label and the address," he said. "If it's smoke, I'll find the match." A few days after that, I got confirmation in the worst, simplest way possible. Colby left her laptop open on the dining table when she stepped away to take a call, and the screen lit up with a calendar notification like it didn't know it was dangerous. It popped up right in front of me, bright and casual. "MK Sync," it said, at an off-site conference room marked private. My throat went tight, but my hands stayed calm. I didn't touch her keyboard, and I didn't start clicking around like an amateur. I pulled out my phone and photographed the notification, the date, the location, and the privacy tag. Then I stepped back like I'd never been near it. I didn't need to know what they talked about in that room yet. I needed to know it existed, in her world, on her schedule. I walked to my desk and updated my timeline with clean entries. Contract day, locks on storage, therapy clause pressure, insurance review notice, then recurring payments to a consultant with no real footprint, and now a private meeting tied to the same initials. It read like a playbook, and I hated how organized it looked, because it meant Colby had been organizing too. Klaus texted me later with screenshots from Maren's public socials. Nothing wild, nothing you'd point to and call scandal on its own, but the overlap was too neat. The same restaurants Colby had suddenly started discovering. The same art events Colby claimed were networking. The same little details showing up in both their lives like a shared script. Colby came home that night and tossed her keys in the bowl, acting normal, acting bored. Acting like I was the only unstable variable in the house. She glanced at my desk and the binders, then looked away like I was playing with toys. "You're still doing your paperwork thing," she said, and her mouth curled like she was amused. I'm keeping track of what matters, I said, and I didn't offer her any more than that. I didn't confront her, because confrontation was what she wanted. She wanted me loud and messy and emotional so she could point at it later. I let her keep thinking I was just a laid-off guy trying not to fall apart, and I sat back down at my desk and added Marin's name to the front of my timeline in bold. I was still staring at the bolded name when the doorbell rang. It wasn't the soft chime you ignore. It was the firm press of someone who expected to be let in. When I opened the door, my mother-in-law, Dalia Paran, stood there in a tailored coat, posture straight, eyes already scanning past me like she was inspecting a property. She didn't come over to check on me, and she didn't ask how I was sleeping. Dahlia came over because she'd heard the word contract, and rules were her favorite language. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, walked straight to the kitchen, and opened cabinets like she owned the place. When she saw Colby's neat little schedule taped inside the cabinet door, she didn't even blink. Her mouth didn't twitch. Her eyebrows didn't lift. She just stared at it for a second like she was reading a menu, then closed the cabinet carefully. "So," she said, turning to me, "she finally put her instincts on paper." I grabbed 2 mugs and moved like I was on autopilot because standing still around Dahlia always felt like giving her the advantage. "Do you want tea?" I asked, even though I already knew she'd say yes because Dahlia liked the ritual of being served. "I'll take tea," she said, "and I'll take facts while you're at it." While the water heated, I pulled Colby's fee sheet from my folder and set it on the counter between us. I couldn't resist. "There's a service charge for shared kitchen time," I said, keeping my tone flat. "You're standing in billable hours right now." Dahlia looked down at the paper, then reached into her purse and pulled out cash like she'd done it 1,000 times. She counted it out slowly, exact, and set it on the counter with the kind of calm that made my skin prickle. "I respect commitment to pettiness," she said. "If you're going to do something ugly, at least do it clean." That was Dahlia's version of humor, and it landed like a slap. She sipped her tea once it was poured, then set the mug down with control, like she didn't want the ceramic making noise. "Has Colby been pulling money from the family trust for what she calls household optimization?" she asked, and she said it like it was a normal question, like she was asking if we needed the roof checked. "I don't know," I said, because I wasn't going to lie to Dahlia. "But I've seen consulting payments that don't make sense." Her face tightened just a little, and with Dahlia, that counted as a siren. She didn't ask what kind of consulting like a curious person. She asked like a prosecutor. "Whose name?" she said. "Marin Klein," I answered. "There's a recurring payment labeled Klein Strategy Consulting, and the LLC looks thin." Dahlia's eyes stayed on mine. "Marin is the consultant," she said, and it wasn't a question. It was a filing label. Then she reached into her purse again and pulled out a small flash drive, black and plain, and set it on the counter beside the cash. "I sit on the Townhouse Association's security committee," she said. "The concierge answers my calls." I didn't touch the drive yet. "What is this?" I asked, and my voice came out harder than I meant. "Footage access," she said. "Entry hall, package room, basement corridor, street-facing angles. The places people forget exist because they think the building is on their side." Dahlia wasn't offering comfort. She was offering leverage, and I understood why. Trust money had rules, and Dahlia guarded rules like a religion. She slid another paper across the counter, a memo with trust letterhead and careful language that sounded polite until you read the teeth in it. "Reputational risk," it said. "Prohibited personal benefit." It was written like a gentle warning, but it was really a threat wrapped in good manners. "If Colby uses trust funds for personal benefit dressed up as business," Dahlia said, "she doesn't just get a scolding. She gets consequences." I nodded once, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. "You're not here for me," I said. "You're here for the trust." Dahlia didn't deny it. "I am here for order," she said, then leaned in slightly. "And I am here because Colby thinks she's the smartest person in every room. That's how people get lazy." She finished her tea, stood, and adjusted her coat like the visit was a completed task. "Do what you want with that," she said, nodding at the drive, "but do it carefully." After she left, I didn't stand around replaying it. I called Klaus and told him to get on a video call, then plugged the flash drive into my laptop with my hands steady. When the footage loaded, we watched the building angles in silence, and it didn't take long. Marin came in after hours more than once, slipping through the basement corridor and using a service door like she owned the code. The camera didn't care about excuses, and neither did I. I wasn't there those nights, so I didn't pretend I remembered anything. I paused the frames, wrote down the timestamps in words, and saved the clips into my evidence folder, while Klaus stayed on the line and watched with me. I saved the last clip into my folder and labeled it with the camera angle and time. Then I heard Klaus breathe out on the call like he'd been holding it in. I didn't give him a speech because the footage spoke for itself, and we both knew it. I ejected the flash drive, wrapped it in a plain envelope, and put it in my desk drawer like it was a passport. Colby came home not long after, and she didn't go anywhere near my desk. She moved through the kitchen, checked the cabinet schedule like it was a religious text, and started talking about the therapy clause like it was suddenly urgent. "I'm worried about your adjustment," she said, loud enough for the whole first floor to hear. Then she glanced at her phone and tapped the screen. "Graham, I'm just saying I want him supported during this transition." I didn't need to see the call to know Graham Sutter was on speaker, hovering like a witness. Colby set the phone down on the counter, angled just right, and kept her voice soft the way people do when they're building a story. "Daniel has been tense," she continued. "I don't want things to spiral." I leaned against the counter and looked at the phone like it was a bug on the wall. "Colby, if you want therapy, then say you want therapy," I said. "Don't perform concern into a microphone." Her eyes flashed for half a second, then went calm again. "See," she said, still in that careful tone, "this is what I mean. He gets defensive." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't pace. I just nodded once because she wanted me to fight the framing, and I wasn't going to hand her the footage she was trying to record in real time. Colby ended the call with a gentle goodbye, like she'd just finished a charity check-in, and she walked upstairs with her shoulders stiff and proud. The next afternoon, Marin showed up while Colby was out. I saw her through the frosted glass first, her silhouette right at the door, and then the doorbell rang with that confident press like she belonged on the other side. When I opened the door, Marin stood there in a crisp coat, hair perfect, eyes bright like she was walking into her own office. "I need to grab some work materials for Colby," she said, and she leaned forward like she expected me to step aside. I kept my voice calm and level. "Just so you know, the doorbell camera records," I said, and I held the door where it was, not blocking her with my body, just not moving. Marin's smile tightened. Then she tried a different angle. "Daniel, this doesn't have to be weird," she said. "Colby is under a lot of pressure and you're making it harder." "I'm not making anything harder," I said. "I'm standing in my house and you're asking to come in without her here." She huffed like I was being childish, and then she slipped and said the quiet part out loud. "She's already lining up the paperwork," Marin said, and her eyes flicked past me like she was picturing it. "You should make it easy before things get embarrassing for you." The word embarrassing hit like a threat wearing a polite outfit. I didn't argue with her at the doorway because I didn't need to. I held the same calm tone and made it simple. "You should leave now," I said. "If Colby needs something, she can text me directly." Marin's jaw set, and she stepped back, her heel clicking hard on the stoop like she wanted the sound to count as intimidation. "Fine," she said, and she walked away fast, shoulders tight, like she'd forgotten the camera was still watching. That night I moved through the bedroom like a man cleaning up after a spill, quiet and focused. Colby had left a gym bag on the floor near the closet, one she never used, and it looked wrong sitting there, too deliberate. I picked it up and felt the weight shift in a way fabric shouldn't. My stomach went cold. Inside, tucked under a towel that still had the store crease, was a small recorder. It wasn't hidden well, it was placed. I turned it over and saw a file label with my name on it like someone wanted it found later, like this was a trap with instructions. My hands didn't shake, but my pulse got loud in my ears. I plugged the device into my laptop and listened with my jaw tight. Colby and Marin weren't venting. They were scripting, tossing lines back and forth like they were rehearsing a pitch. Me being unfit, me being paranoid, me being financially resentful, all wrapped in that fake concern tone Colby had used on speaker for Graham. The cameras could show who walked in and out. This showed what they planned to make people believe. I didn't smash the recorder, and I didn't storm upstairs to wave it in her face. I copied the files, saved them to multiple places, and put the device back exactly where it was, down to the fold of the towel. Then I sat at my desk and booked my own evaluation with an independent clinician. My choice, not hers. And I showed up the next day with my notes and my spine straight. The clinician asked direct questions, and I answered them without drama. When it was done, I left with a clean written report stating I was stable, coherent, and not impaired, and I scanned it into my folder before I even took my coat off. That evening, I played the recording for Klaus over the phone, keeping my voice steady while it ran. When it ended, he went quiet for a second in a way that scared me more than yelling would have. "She's not trying to win," Klaus said finally, low and flat. "She's trying to erase you." I didn't argue with that, because it fit too well. I opened my safety tab, typed a new line labeled narrative attack, and hit save with a hard press of the key. I opened my safety tab and stared at the words like they were a diagnosis. Then I closed the laptop and made the one move Colby couldn't control. I hired Rowan Winters because people in Philly talk, and her name came up the same way "Don't touch that stove" comes up, short, serious, and consistent. When I called her office, the receptionist didn't sound surprised by my last name, and that alone told me Colby's world had already been whispering. Rowan met me in a clean conference room that smelled like coffee and toner, and she didn't waste time asking how I felt. She was sharp-eyed, late 40s maybe, hair pulled back, posture like a person who lived in courtrooms. She brought in Nina Nakamura as the second line, more tactical and calm, the kind of attorney who thought in moves and countermoves without needing to posture for the room. Rowan looked at my folders and said, "You brought documents, not stories, and I appreciate that." "I'm done being a story," I told her, and I slid the first binder across the table. I laid everything out in a clean sequence: the 50-50 contract, the fee schedule with the shared space nonsense, the therapy clause, Marin's doorstep comments caught on camera, the planted recorder audio, the insurance notice about the beneficiary review, and the consulting trail tied to Klein's strategy consulting. Nina took notes without interrupting, and Rowan kept sorting as I talked, building piles like she was stacking evidence into legal buckets that would hold up under pressure. When I finished, Rowan didn't gasp or look sad for me. She clicked her pen, looked down the list and said, "This is a control pattern, and it's documented. That's good for you and bad for her." Nina leaned in slightly. "We're going to assume she escalates," she said. "Not with violence, but with social and financial sabotage, and maybe an attempt to paint you as unstable." "I already have an independent evaluation," I said, and I passed over the report. Rowan scanned it and gave a quick nod. "That was the right move," she said. "Now we keep you clean and quiet while we widen the net." She brought in Keiko Tanaka, a forensic specialist, and Keiko showed up with a laptop and a no-nonsense face like she'd seen every trick already. She didn't accept my interpretations. She asked for source documents, statements, copies of notices, and anything that could be verified. It wasn't cold. It was disciplined, and I respected it. Keiko built tight charts, documented sourcing, and timelines that matched transaction patterns, and she did it in a way that couldn't be waved off as assumptions. When she circled back, she pointed to the consulting payments and said, "This isn't just money moving to a consultant. Some of it cycles through a PR vendor." I frowned. "PR for what?" I asked, because the words landed wrong in my gut. "Reputation cleanup," Keiko said, and she rotated the screen toward me. "Crisis management, search suppression, that type of service." Nina tapped the table once, controlled. "That matters because if Colby is using firm-connected resources or funds tied to professional channels to manage personal damage control, people above her will care," she said. "That's not just marriage drama, that's exposure." Rowan watched my face for a second, like she was measuring how steady I was. "We're not going to threaten," she said. "We're going to present facts in the right places, and we're going to make settlement the safest option for her." My phone buzzed while we were still in the room, and I glanced down at a message from Klaus. He had a way of dropping information like a weight, no extra words. He wrote that Rochelle had quietly asked HR whether my layoff could be reclassified, like she wanted to wash her hands. That told me she'd been leaned on, and it made my stomach twist because it confirmed what I already felt in my bones. Rowan didn't let me spiral. She held up her hand and said, "Here's the hard part. People like your wife get more dangerous when they feel control slipping. Not dangerous like a movie, but dangerous like a slow leak that ruins your house." Nina added, "She will try to isolate you, drain you, and label you, and she will do it with polite language and paperwork." I sat there, feeling the room tighten around the word erase, and I didn't pretend I was above fear. I just refused to let it run me. "So what's the goal?" I asked. "Because I'm not walking into a public trial unless I have to." Rowan folded her hands. "We force a settlement without a public trial," she said. "But we keep a public option ready as leverage, because Colby cares about reputation the way most people care about oxygen." I nodded once, then slid my exhibits folder to the center of the table like a handoff in a relay and said, "Tell me what you need next, and I'll get it." I kept my eyes on Rowan as she talked me through the next steps. Then I left her office with a sealed packet in my coat pocket that felt heavier than paper. Colby's firm had a partner dinner coming up at a private club in Center City, one of those places with quiet carpets and loud money, and spouses were expected like furniture. Colby didn't remove me from the list, and that told me she still believed she could manage me in public the way she managed me at home. I showed up dressed plain and solid, not flashy, in a dark suit that fit right and shoes that didn't squeak. I walked in like I belonged, because I did. I'd been part of that world for years, even if I wasn't the one signing checks or throwing titles around. The lobby smelled like polished wood and expensive cologne, and the staff smiled the same way they always did when the room was full of people who never heard the word no. I scanned faces and spotted Leland Perrin near the bar, Colby's cousin and the guy who chaired the firm's risk committee. He saw me and froze for half a second, confusion sliding across his face like he'd just spotted a fire alarm he didn't remember installing. "Daniel," he said, polite and tight. "I didn't realize you were coming." "I was invited," I said, and I kept my tone neutral because I wasn't there to perform. "I need 5 minutes in private if you can spare it." Leland hesitated, then nodded like his job trained him to handle problems quietly. He led me to a side hallway near a coat room, away from the main hum. I pulled the sealed packet out and placed it in his hand like a transfer of custody. "This is what I have," I said. Keiko's summary of the consulting trail, the LLC details, and the PR spend pattern tied back to personal benefit. Leland's eyes dropped to the envelope. "Is this personal?" he asked. And he didn't mean emotionally. He meant liability. "It's factual," I said. "If this is clean, you'll clear it fast. If it's not, you'll want to know before it owns you." He held my stare for a beat, then tucked the packet against his side like it burned. "Understood," he said, and he walked back toward the room with a new stiffness in his shoulders. Dinner started with the usual soft clatter of glasses and practiced laughter, and I took my seat like I had a right to it. I didn't talk more than necessary, and I didn't drink because I wanted my edges sharp. When Colby finally arrived, she walked in like she was late on purpose, head high, smile set. Marin was at her side, calm and professional, carrying a slim folio like she belonged with the logistics, not the spotlight. Marin wasn't dressed like support staff. She wore a tailored suit and a neutral expression, eyes moving like she was tracking risk, not people. Colby spoke to her in quick, clipped phrases, business, not warmth, and Marin nodded once, already scanning the room for who was watching. It wasn't personal. It was confirmation. A little later, Dahlia arrived. Nobody invited her, but trustees didn't need invitations, and Dahlia moved through the room like she was counting exits. She didn't hug Colby. She didn't greet Marin. She just took in the faces and the power lines between them like she was reading a map. At the table, Colby leaned toward me with a soft voice and hard words, careful enough that people nearby could catch the tone without catching the content. "I'm glad you came," she said, smiling. "I was worried you might not be up for social settings right now." "I'm doing fine," I said, and I kept my eyes on my plate like I didn't care. Colby kept going anyway, because she couldn't help herself. "With your employment situation and the adjustment issues, I just want everyone to feel comfortable," she said, and she let the words mental health hang in the space without saying them directly. It was slick, and it was meant for witnesses. I let her talk, because people notice tone shifts when someone is performing, and Colby always performed. Marin watched me like she was waiting for me to snap, and Graham Sutter appeared at Colby's shoulder like he'd been assigned there, smile polite, posture protective. Then Leland stood up. He didn't raise his voice, and he didn't make a scene, because these people didn't do explosions. He just cleared his throat and said, "We need an immediate closed-door partner meeting," and the air changed so fast I could feel it, like everyone smelled smoke at the same time. Chairs shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. People didn't ask why, because the risk committee chair didn't stand up like that unless something had teeth. Colby's face went tight and still, her smile locking in place like a mask. Dahlia set her fork down and spoke calmly, loud enough for the table to hear without shouting. "Any trust funds used for personal consulting arrangements will trigger removal from certain benefits pending review," she said, and her tone was so matter-of-fact it made the threat sharper. Marin's eyes flicked toward the exit, and she started to rise like she could slip away before anyone connected dots. Graham reached for Colby's elbow, guiding her with that lawyer touch that said client, not spouse. Colby didn't look at me. She looked past me, like I was already a closed file. I sat there, steady, while the room reorganized around the problem Colby brought in with her. I took my napkin off my lap, folded it once, and stood up from the table like I was leaving on my own terms. I walked out of the club like I was just stepping away for air, then kept going until the night noise swallowed the room behind me. By the time mediation rolled around, the pressure had moved from whispers to memos, and Colby couldn't pretend it was all in my head anymore. Rowan scheduled it fast, and the location felt intentional, a bland office with beige walls and tired lighting, like it was designed to make everyone feel worn down enough to surrender. Colby showed up with Graham and a new attitude that didn't match her usual ice. She still held her chin high, but there was controlled panic under it, the kind you see when a person realizes the exits are closing. Graham did most of the talking at first, gentle voice, careful words, like he could soothe a fire by naming it something else. Rowan didn't let the room drift. She opened with the domestic contract Colby wrote herself and slid a copy across the table. "He signed your rules," Rowan said, steady and blunt. "Now we're applying them consistently." Colby's eyes narrowed. "That document was meant to create stability," she said, and her voice stayed polite even as her fingers pressed hard into her notepad. Nina didn't argue with her tone. She just laid down the independent evaluation report and spoke like she was reading weather. "There's no basis for an unfit narrative," Nina said. "He was assessed independently and found stable, coherent, and not impaired." Graham tried to pivot. "We were simply concerned about adjustment," he said, smiling a little too much like he was selling calm. "Concern is not a clinical finding," Nina replied, and she didn't raise her voice or add emotion, which made it land harder. Then Keiko took over with charts that looked like they belonged in a boardroom, not a divorce meeting. Money out, money around, money back, clean arrows and dates written out in words. She pointed to the consulting line and showed how it didn't match any real work product and how the LLC footprint looked like a paper mask. Colby stared at the pages like she wanted to burn them with her eyes. "This is interpretation," she said. "You're drawing conclusions." Keiko didn't flinch. "These are transactions," she said. "The conclusions are yours if you want to explain the missing deliverables." Colby tried a different angle and turned toward me like I was the problem she could still control. "Your labor ledger is emotional accounting," she said, soft and sharp at the same time. "You are assigning value to things spouses do for each other." Rowan leaned forward slightly and her voice cut clean through the room. "He didn't make it emotional," she said. "You made it financial the moment you put a shared space fee in writing and demanded reimbursements like he was a roommate." I didn't speak much because my job wasn't to persuade. My job was to sit there stable and let the documents do the talking. Still, I watched Colby's face every time Dahlia's trust memo got mentioned because it hovered over everything like a shadow. Colby knew if Dahlia hit the switch, her long-term safety net would shrink fast, and the fear of that was the only emotion she couldn't hide. The final push didn't even come from our side. It came from Leland's side, the pressure of an internal investigation that Colby couldn't charm away. Graham's posture shifted when the word discovery came up, and I could tell Colby didn't want emails, expense logs, and partner eyes digging through her life. After hours of tight back and forth, we landed on a hard agreement. A final split, a defined payout, townhouse sale terms, and a confidentiality structure that protected me without letting her rewrite the story. Colby read every line like she was looking for a trap, then signed like she was swallowing glass. No tears and no scene, just a pen moving across paper the same way she'd tried to end me with paper in the first place. When we walked out, the hallway air felt colder and cleaner than the meeting room. I didn't feel victory exactly, but my shoulders dropped for the first time in a long time, and I followed Rowan and Nina to the elevator without looking back. I stepped out of the elevator with Rowan and Nina, shook their hands, and didn't look back down the hallway. I didn't celebrate with a trip or a new car, and I didn't post anything vague online about new beginnings. I cleaned out my side of the townhouse one room at a time, packed what was mine into labeled boxes, and moved into a smaller place across the river in Camden where the rent was simple and the locks were new. The first night there, I slept straight through without listening for footsteps, without bracing for a door to open, and that felt bigger than any payout. Klaus came over the second weekend with takeout and a legal pad, and he kept saying the same thing while we sat at my bare kitchen table. "This wasn't just about you," he said. "This is a pattern, and you know how to map patterns." He was right, and I hated that he was right. I took my old skills, plain language documentation, timelines that made sense to regular people, receipts that held up under pressure, and turned them into something useful. I built a small project that helps people spot financial manipulation disguised as fairness, the kind that hides behind spreadsheets and polite words. I called it Split Rules, Real Control, because I didn't want it to sound like a therapy slogan. The point wasn't revenge. The point was clarity before you get cornered and labeled unstable for noticing what's happening. Rochelle reached out a few weeks after the settlement, and she asked if we could talk off the record. We met in a quiet coffee shop near the hospital campus, and she didn't meet my eyes at first. "Your layoff wasn't just restructuring," she said carefully. "There was pressure tied to an acquisition, and your position complicated certain conversations." She didn't confess like she was begging forgiveness. She spoke like someone trying to live with herself, and that was enough for me to log the truth and move on. Dahlia never became warm, and I never expected her to. One afternoon, I got a short message from her that said, "You were efficient." From her, that was basically a hug, and I saved it without replying. A few months in, Nina called and said she had someone I needed to meet. Senator Marin Walsh sat across from me in a quiet office, composed but tired, and she described budget discipline that kept her dependent and compliant. I walked her through statements, permissions, and the small daily humiliations that get disguised as partnership, and I showed her how equal can be a costume for control. When she opened her own accounts and put boundaries in writing, she didn't thank me like a fan. She thanked me like a person who got air back. The last time I saw Colby was outside a fundraiser across the street under clean white lights. She looked right through me like I was a closed chapter, but the room didn't bend around her the way it used to. I went home, answered 3 new inquiries waiting in my inbox, and opened my laptop to keep building. Was I wrong to turn her rules against her? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe if this story hit home. Hold up for a second. Can I ask you something personal? If you've ever had someone slap fair rules on your life just to control you, would you play their game and document everything, or would you walk away the moment you saw the trap? If you've got the hype feature, tap it to support this video and help it reach more people. Then please subscribe and hit like. It's important for us, and it's just one click, and drop a comment, even if it's just good story or what you would have done.